Welcome to Shamanic Voices, a profound journey into the heart of shamanism, led by a seasoned practitioner with over 40 years of experience and his journeyman. To all our current listeners, welcome back. And to our new ones, we hope you enjoy the journey. Join us every other Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, streaming on Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcasts, and all other major streaming platforms. We also have video podcast on YouTube. Please check it out if you are interested in putting a face to the voices. Join us as you listen on your way to work, while eating breakfast, wherever you may be, as we delve into the wisdom of the ancient world and learn how this can help you navigate your modern life. As a reminder, if you did not read the description, these will be explicit episodes sharing trauma, abuse, and more. These are not for the lighthearted, but at the same time can bring with them healing and understanding. Please listen to this series with that in mind. So sit back, relax, and join us on this journey.
Good morning and welcome to episode, I think this is going to be episode 26 of Shamanic Voices. We're continuing, and this will be episode 3, where we're carrying on our conversations in noble lives, focusing on the life of Jayne. Good morning, Jayne. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Well, can't wait to hear what else you've uncovered as you look back over how you got from there, where you grew up and where you were and where you lived, to here, and talk about the transition and all that you've encountered along the way.
Well, I think last time we ended with the promise that we would be talking about my experiences with extra-dimensional beings. So this time I think we can talk about that. I think I already mentioned that I had a near-death experience when I was a toddler. That was actually the second time I had a near-death experience. Because when I was a newborn, I did my first experience. And I always wondered if having 2 near-death experiences really early in life had a lasting impact. Even as a young child, I had a sense of knowing when something wasn't morally right. And I can only guess that it was because of those experiences, because I doubt that I learned much from my family. I also mentioned that an extra-dimensional somebody showed me my son when I was 8 years old. I don't know what race extra-dimensional beings they were, but they were very interested in my son even 20 years before he was born. So that was an interesting experience there. I think I might probably mention that in the last.
I think you did. And when we talk about near-death experiences, a very interesting parallel. There was a clinical psychologist, Dr. Kenneth Ring, R-I-N-G. We actually wrote a book about it. I think it was called The Omega Factor. It had Omega in it anyway. And which, of course, was the last letter in the Greek alphabet. In it, he was exploring the similarities between NDE, or let's say near-death experiencers like yourself, and people who'd had ET encounters, people who had undergone what today we would call alien abductions, and how in both cases the people afterwards seemed to be much more spiritual, much more oriented toward care about the planet and about other people, much more empathic, and they frequently tended to have extrasensory abilities emerge, of which they knew nothing previously. Would some of those ring true for you as well?
Absolutely. My grandfather died when I was 10 years old, and I'm thinking it was probably 5 minutes after he died, he came to visit me. It was 5:30 in the morning. He came into my room and sat at the edge of my bed, and he told me he had to go to a new home. And somehow I knew what he was talking about, and it didn't bother me that he didn't have a body. We just talked. And then he told me, be a good girl, do what your daddy tells you to do. And he moved on. And 2 hours later, alarm clocks went off. I was in the kitchen reading our breakfast, and I said, Mommy, Grandpa died last night. And she said, No, he didn't. eat your breakfast. Well, and she argued with me for a little bit, and then the phone rang with the news that he had died. And she said, "How did you know?" And I said, "Well, he talked to me. Can't you feel the emptiness in the world that he's missing? Can you feel that he's gone?" And she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so that was an interesting experience, because at age 10, I didn't question any of it. There was no common sense to get in the way. And
Yeah, that's true.
It took several years before I wondered why do I see these things? And throughout my life, I can't even count how many times before I officially learned mediumship. Times someone who had recently died came to me, or sometimes I would seek them out just to talk to them about, do you have anything you want to say to your family or whatever. So that was something that kind of, for years, I wasn't sure whether I was crazy or if it was real.
Well, when they come in and want to leave a message for the family, is it always something profound, or is it sometimes something like, "I should have missed that pastrami and rye. I wish I could order one right now"? How does it work?
It's a really simple message where, like, my grandfather wanted to say goodbye. He didn't want to die, and he'd had a heart attack, so it was completely unexpected. He was in his early 60s. And he really just wanted to make sure my grandma was okay as she could be. And my grandparents knew that things weren't quite right at home. These were my dad's parents. They didn't know how bad it was. But they could sense something wasn't right, but they were like, he's going to have to take care of his own family, referring to my dad. And my dad wasn't aware either. So that's just, I think my grandpa really did care, but he felt the need to keep his distance in life. And then after he died, it's like, well, and a lot of people seem to feel this way. They die and they're like, well, I have one last chance to say something that's been on my mind, and they want to say it before they move on. So that's usually something like that.
Now, as an adult, you've found yourself being a bit of a medium, haven't you?
Yeah, that's only been in the past 5 years or so, but I can get into that a little bit later. As you also mentioned, alien abduction. I was about 15 years old when I was in Girl Scouts, and we went to an Air Force base with the Girl Scout troop. The whole purpose of this trip was that we were supposed to be talking to some young women who were pilots in the Air Force, and they were supposed to be inspiring us to do something besides cooking and cleaning as adults. And this one young woman who was a pilot, she was probably in her early to mid 20s, and she was a bit arrogant. She was giving us this tour, and she said, sometimes we get, you're going to be sleeping in the middle of the airplane hangar here on the floor. Sometimes we get visitors in the middle of the night and people disappear. But she goes, I don't worry about it. People who leave, they always come back. She goes, I've been taken several times, and, no big deal. You don't remember anything, whatever goes on. And she acted like it was pretty cool.
She actually said this?
He said that to us, and I didn't. I was feeling suicidal at the time because of my life at home. But some of the other girls were really disturbed by that. And one girl in particular seemed to know what she was talking about. And she was just panicked about it. And I'm like, whatever, she's probably making it up. It doesn't matter. Wow. But I was taken in the middle of the night. We were just kind of lying there on the floor talking the way teenage girls do. And the girl sitting next to me, who was kind of panicked about it, said that she had seen something that didn't look quite right. So we all put the covers over our heads. And then the next thing I remember, I felt really disoriented, and it felt like some time had passed, but it was 2 a.m. So I just assumed that I'd fallen asleep or something. And I had this sudden urge to go to the bathroom. So I got up to go to the bathroom, but I felt like as I was walking, I was more floating than walking. And as I approached the ladies' room, someone was coming out, and she walked right through me. And then I went, oh, that was weird. And so I went in the restroom, couldn't open the door to the stall, so I just walked right through it. And I went, oh, that's weird. couldn't make anything happen in there. So I go out to wash my hands and I can't turn the water on. I could reach out to touch the faucet. Like, well, I guess I'm not washing my hands. Where are my arms? And I realized I couldn't see my arms. So I stood there for a minute, kind of more intrigued than panicked, because I thought, well, maybe I'm dead. This is great. I'm going to go back home. And then my body kind of started to come back. And so I walked out of the room, and as I walked outside, one of the girls in my troop was standing there, and she said, "There you are. We've been looking all over for you. Your mom is so mad you've been gone for an hour. Where have you been?" And I said, "I just went to the bathroom." And so then my mom comes up. She's all teary-eyed and mad, and you could imagine, just gritting her teeth and yelling at me. And I'm like, "I just went to the bathroom." So she ordered me to go back to bed and stay there. And there was another girl who disappeared, and she was back by morning. And the next morning, neither one of us remembered a thing, but we both felt just dead tired. And,
so any idea of where you went other than to the restroom?
I have no idea. I don't have any memory of anything that happened, but I suspect they installed things in me because of where I was kind of feeling uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
The feeling that prompted me to think I needed to go to the restroom immediately.
Those wires and antennae hanging out of the body, they're kind of awkward, aren't they?
So I have no memory of what happened, and the other girl has never said anything about it, so I doubt that she remembers anything either. But, in the end, I just went home irritated that people were yelling at me again, and I didn't know what they were yelling about. But, that was pretty normal with my mom being the way she was. I got yelled at for things that weren't real all the time, so that was kind of not terribly unusual, but annoying.
So that was your first actual abduction experience?
I think that's the only one I have any knowledge of. There may have been others, I don't know, but
how about the one that you mentioned where you were standing out somewhere in the open and you were made rigid, like you couldn't be moved? People even tried to move you.
I was just about to mention that. That was a year later. I was 16 years old, and I was at a youth camp. And I really hated crowds, so I avoided the food and all the loud evening gatherings, and I wasn't used to eating because I didn't get to eat at home, so I avoided meals because I didn't like the crowd, so I didn't eat the whole weekend, which is weird. So after being there I think we got there on a Friday, we were there all day Saturday, and then Sunday morning, I was walking toward the cafeteria to go get breakfast with everyone else, and I looked up and saw a tiny light at the top of a tree, and I just reasoned that it must be a small bird, and I wondered how could it be sitting on the very top twig and not bending it. I pointed it out to a friend. It's the same friend who I saw at the Air Force base, and she said, "I don't see anything, you're crazy," and she left. She's like, "I'm gonna go get food." So I stood there staring at the light, and the light came closer and said, "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you." And I didn't know who it was or how we could communicate with thoughts, but a part of me hoped that I would be abducted and taken off the planet because life at home was so bad. So I spoke to the light being, for a minute or two, and it seemed like a very peaceful being, whatever it was. But then I felt my body had become completely stiff, and my feet were fused to the ground, and I could feel these energetic roots growing from the bottoms of my feet, going deep into the earth. And strangely, I felt safe, but I couldn't move. I was as still as a statue, and some adults came out to check on me, and they realized they couldn't move me. A grown man, a pretty big guy, put his hands on my shoulders and pushed as hard as he could push. I couldn't budge my little 105-pound body. So they just stood there and waited. One of the men was a member of a Christian band that was visiting the youth camp. Their truck said Rich Mullins and a Ragamuffin Band. And the man who was trying to speak to me was called Beaker. One of the band members, that was just his stage name, I guess. Beaker said, he told the other adult who was there that I might have a message in a few minutes, because he explained that, some people go into this state and then connect with the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then you have a message. I don't think it was the Blessed Virgin Mary. But a few minutes later, the light being said that I was supposed to deliver a message to a man whose mother called him Wayne. And Beaker said that he would deliver the message if I would give it to him. And the light being was still speaking to me and told me that Beaker's real name was David. Now, the funny thing is, nobody knew that. Everybody called him Beaker. So I looked at him and I said, your mother calls you David. And Beaker/David was really shocked because he said, wow, nobody knows that. Or do you know my mother? I'm like, no, but your mother calls you David. So the message that I was supposed to deliver was, Firestone is bad, Goodyear is good, September 19th, 1997, and then I saw this terrible car accident. And I saw a man die. And that particular year was 1986, so 1997 seemed like a lifetime away. That would have been 11 years into the future. And I wasn't old enough to own a car, so I didn't have any idea what Firestone or Goodyear meant. It was years later when I discovered that those were brand names for tires. But Beaker walked with me in an attempt to deliver the message, and then more spirit beings approached me, and they were not pretty little light beings. They were just evil. They got into my head and took the form of hornets so they could scare me. They didn't want me to deliver the message, and I was the only one who could see the hornet creatures. They told me that they would kill me, but I didn't care. So they threatened my children, and I told them that I didn't have children and I would never have any. But I was still just so overwhelmed that I was barely able to speak or talk.
Now, this was the same day.
Yeah, this is at the same time. So they were,
Okay.
I could walk from the original place to where Wayne was so I could deliver the message. And the closer I got to him, the more these evil, whatever they were, tried to scare me off.
Now, you mentioned the light being. Is this like a sphere of light, like people refer to seeing, like an orb of light, or is it just...
Yeah, kind of an orb. And it seemed to be very gentle and peaceful. And I have the feeling that particular being was trying to prevent this guy's death. But eventually they led me to where a group of teenagers were sitting. And so Rich Mullins was speaking to the kids, and they were all listening to him intently because he was a genuinely nice person who had this just spellbinding effect on kids. And I remember that he was telling the kids to be kind to each other and not get involved in negative activities that other people get into. And he invited everyone to think for themselves, choose a path of peace. And when I saw him, I knew immediately that this was the man I was supposed to talk to. But I couldn't remember what I was supposed to say because the hornet creatures made me forget. So Rich Mullins wasn't really interested in talking to me because he had had times where teenage girls came to him and said that God had talked to them and that he was supposed to father their children. And he was like, whoa, no thanks. I want nothing to do with this. He wanted to stay as far away from little girls as possible. And you can understand why.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he didn't really want anything to do with this. He probably thought it was just some head game. So he finished his time at the youth camp, and then he left with his band. 11 years later, Rich Mullins died in a single car accident. It was just before the whole Firestone tire scandal. And he just happened to die on September 19th, 1997. After his death, I learned that his mother called him Wayne. Wayne was his middle name because he had an uncle named Rich, and that's how the family just distinguished. And I knew nothing of that at the time. So I still don't know exactly who the light being was, but I'm pretty sure the purpose of the message was it was supposed to save Rich Mullins' life. But
did you ever run into the hornets again?
I did because. Let's see, I was 16 the first time, and there were several other times when, wherever I lived, Rich Mullins would be traveling with his band, and if he was in town, I would get a message. Go to this bookstore where you're signing books or something. And so I would just get in the car and drive over there, and as soon as I saw him, the hornet things would come back. And I would end up leaving. So that happened several times. But I was never able to fully deliver the message to him because of the hornet things. They just did not want me to tell him. And it got weird a few times. One time when I was in college, I was living probably 900 miles from where I was the first time. And I got the message, get in your car, drive over to this church. He was setting up, they have a concert there. So I'm like, fine, whatever. I drive over there, and very odd things happened. I pulled into the parking lot, and there was a police officer there, kind of, as security to guard the area because they didn't want anyone in the church while he was setting up. And so my car just turned invisible, and I drove right past the police officer parked in the parking lot. And I was like, oh, that's strange. And I was hearing this voice say, just walk into the building, you'll be fine. Well, the door was locked, so I walked right through the door. And I was like, oh, this is weird. I got all the way around to the room where he was setting up for the concert, and then all of a sudden my body came back, and people were like, oh, how did you get in here? I'm like, I don't know. I was so baffled by the experience of walking through locked doors and walls that I'd completely forgotten the message. And then I went, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm going to get in trouble. Then I got all upset and I left because I panicked. I had anxiety problems. And the following Sunday, someone from my church came to me and said, I saw you there. How did you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. And I don't know. So my anxiety got in the way. I was never able to tell him.
So how large were these hornets? How many hornets were they really?
Oh, they were about this. They were, they looked like red pieces of light, little red, about the size of a hornet, just buzzing around me, getting in my head. They got in my head in an effort to find my darkest fears, which is why they took on the form of hornets, because they figured they could get to me that way. They didn't really. They just looked like little bits of fire, buzzing around. But I'm not sure that I want to know where they were. I just don't want ever to see them again.
Understandable. Yeah.
I guess I would probably, if I ever saw that again, I would probably try to bring about some kind of spirit ray that would spray them, make them go away.
Yes.
Or one of those, a can that blows fire out or something. Something.
Time for the bug spray. Yeah.
Yeah, I after Rich Mullins died, I never saw anything like that again. I mean, he was a very genuinely good guy who, that he was doing a lot of good with the world with his music and his ministry and stuff. And I think there was some creatures on the other side that didn't like him. So I really don't know, but that whole situation kind of plagued me for years.
Were there other times between the very earliest years and the age of 16 when you had other psychic experiences or experiences with other dimensional entities?
Most of what happened after that was I started seeing things before they happened. So when I was 17 years old, there was a young couple at my church, and the man was my Sunday school teacher, and his wife, they were very well liked, and he announced one day that his wife was pregnant. Everyone in the whole church cheered, yay, they're going to have a baby. I immediately knew that baby was going to die. And I couldn't say how I knew that, but I felt it as if I was remembering it. And but of course it hadn't happened yet, and I was kind of wrestled with it for a while. Why do I feel this way? I felt panicked for a couple of days, and then one day, I guess 2 or 3 days later, I was out in the kitchen. I was like, I need to call him. I don't think he wants to hear from me right now because his wife is currently in the process of miscarrying the baby. So then just as I'm thinking this, my sister came out in the kitchen. She said, oh, I need to call our Sunday school teacher. So she picks up the phone to call, and I'm like holding my breath. He was on the phone with her for about 30 seconds. Then he said, oh, I need to go. My wife just came to me. Something's wrong. I went, yep, that's it. Well, it was the following Sunday when he announced that she had lost the baby. And I thought, how did I know that? I didn't know how I knew that, but I have a tendency to see death coming in people. because I don't know why it's usually death, but it's probably because it's an intense experience, and if there's a lot of emotion involved in it, I guess it's like, I'm only guessing that it sends out some kind of psychic something that I'm picking up on. And I don't know, when I see things like that, I see it as if I'm remembering it, but it hasn't happened yet, if that makes any sense.
Some sort of signal, some sort of wave that lets you know it is happening or has happened. And yeah, so when you have a precognitive experience, you experience it as if you were standing in the future, looking back at we in the present.
Now it's more like I remember it as if it happened yesterday. It's just that that yesterday is really tomorrow.
All right.
If that makes any sense at all.
That's what I'm saying. You might have the experience as if you were looking at some events a year from now that happened next week.
Yeah. Yeah, and my dad has always joked with me. He says, "Oh, why don't you just kind of reach in there and get next week's lottery numbers?" I'm like, it'd be really awesome if it worked that way. I mean, if I could do that, I wouldn't have missed so many meals when I was in college.
For sure.
I mean, I could do a lot to help people. I think there was wasn't that Powerball thing up to $1 billion last week?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just reach in there and grab that. That takes care of my problems and all my friends' problems. And
hey, if you could have done that, you'd have had a very different conversation. What are you majoring in, young lady? A Powerball. Lotto? Really? How does that work?
Yeah. I know this guy named Georg who needs a new car.
Absolutely. Yes, he does.
Yeah, well, another thing I saw when I was 18, the stress level had just really gotten bad. And but I saw this vision of myself walking into a building that I'd never been in before, and I had the sense and the vision that it was the first time I'd ever been in that building. Just walking down a hallway, nothing in particular. Two young men walk around the corner and they're having a conversation, and I remembered precisely what they were saying at the time, and they walked past me. And then after I saw that, I went, okay, what was that? Well, several months later, I started taking college classes. I walked into this building and I went, oh, this is the building. I've never been here before, but this looks familiar. This is, okay. I always said, okay, in 3 seconds, these two guys are going to walk around the corner. And in my head, I was saying 3, 2, 1. There they are. These two guys walk around the corner. They're having precisely the conversation that I had seen a month earlier. And they walked past me, didn't even look at me. And I'm like, okay, what was that all about? No idea. Another thing that happened that same year was at that time I was still living with my mother, and I was working on my parents were recently divorced, so I was working on moving in with my dad to go to a different university. And I kept seeing the apartment that my dad would live in. Strangest little thing, in the bathroom mirror was across the wall from the sink. And then I kept going home and kind of expecting our bathroom to be that way. And I went, no, nobody builds bathrooms that way. Why do I keep seeing that? So then when I was able to move in with my dad, walk into the apartment, see the bathroom, oh, there's a second mirror. Someone had bought an extra medicine cabinet and installed it on the wall opposite the sink. And I went, oh, so, all right. So why do I keep seeing this? I don't know. I spent years trying to figure out why I kept seeing stuff like that. But I guess the pattern is I see things like that when my stress level is really, really, really high. And there's almost this kind of buzzing where I tune out the world around me. In fact, that same semester that I was seeing those things, I had gotten a Pell Grant so I could start taking college classes. My parents had recently divorced, and I found out some nasty things my mother was saying and doing, and something in my head clicked, and I walked around for a week in a dissociative fugue state. And because of stuff my mother was doing, all the psychological abuse, and I think we talked about some of those details in podcast episodes 23 and 24. But, after the fugue state, I kind of came back when I could, and then moved in with my dad, and then that's when I saw this bathroom with this extra mirror that made no sense. But I always took it to be kind of a little clue from somebody that maybe I was on the right path. If I saw this before I came here, I come here and this is how it is. Maybe I'm where I'm supposed to be for once.
So these things you would see, sometimes insignificant in their own right, but just a little marker that you were accurately seeing the future. It was going to become your future.
Yeah, and I had to give it some meaning, so I chose to give it the meaning that I was in the right place.
Yeah.
And I can't make those things happen. They just kind of happen when they do, and I really don't know why.
So was there a time in life or an interval of years where the psychic experiences, the paranormal experiences stopped, or there weren't as many of them, and then they resumed, or how did that work coming forward in time?
There was probably 15 years or so where I didn't have a whole lot of that happen. And that's because, by that time I was married, my life had normalized, and I was really busy just engaged with this life, taking care of kids and things like that. And when I was adequately engaged with this life, then I wouldn't have things like that happen. So I guess I had more psychic experiences when I was under so much stress from my surroundings that I disengaged from everything else.
So when the baby is needing a diaper change and projectile vomiting on the wall opposite the kitchen stove, that kind of distracts you from the psychic experiences, right?
It does, yeah, because I'm busy trying to put the baby projected across the room. And we had plenty of that.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess what you're saying is then that these experiences would come visit you. They're always kind of hovering over you in the background, but you would really experience it at times when there was relative equanimity in your life.
Yeah,
relative tranquility.
Really time, and most of the time that stuff just didn't happen. But I guess I could fast forward to after I was married, and I was pregnant with my second child. My husband had just started a new job like a month earlier. And there was a Thanksgiving thing where my husband called me and said, "Hey, I forgot to bring in the drinks the cola drinks I was supposed to bring for Thanksgiving. They're having a Thanksgiving party." So he asked me to bring them in. So, I loaded up baby number one, and we went into the Thanksgiving party. And we're sitting in this crowded room, and I don't think I had had a lot of psychic experiences for at least 10 years. And so this guy named Jeff is sitting across the table from me. It turns out Jeff is my husband's new boss. And the spirit person came in, and this spirit person felt like he had some pretty significant authority. And so the spirit person said, "I have a message that I want you to give to Jeff." And I was concerned that I would goof it up. I said, I always mess these things up, so I want you to take over my body and you tell him. And the spirit person hesitated and said, "That's not really allowed." But I insisted. I said, if you want to tell him, you tell him. Don't ask me to do it, because whatever you're going to want me to say, it's going to be just like Rich Mullins, and it's not going to work. So the spirit person went off, seemed to be checking with authorities, and came back and said, "Okay, it'll be allowed just this once." So this spirit person, whoever he was, kind of stepped into my body, and I stepped out. And I stayed really close by because I was curious. But so the spirit person takes over my body and then stares at Jeff across the table to get his attention. Jeff looks at me and goes, "What?" So using my body, the spirit said, "Heroin is bad. You have to stop now." And Jeff went, "Oh, shh. Let go.
Wow.
Next, the spirit said, "You have less than 5 years. Faith will find you, and she will be hurt." And then the spirit person just left. And I got kind of pulled back into my body. I felt really disoriented. Couldn't remember where I was for a few minutes. And so I got through the rest of the day, somehow got home, and my husband came home from work a couple of days later and said, well, Jeff was really freaked out about what you said to him. And I didn't remember a thing by then. The memory comes back to me eventually, but usually like 6 months later when nobody else cares. And so after a few months, Jeff told my husband, he said, I'm going to clean up my life. I'm going to go back to church. And he seemed really stressed, but for about 4.5 years, his life was cleaned up and he could take care of his daughter. I think he ended up getting a divorce from his wife because she was a heroin addict. And but then eventually things started becoming kind of intolerable for him. There was stuff that's going on at work. It's hard to be a single dad. And he started kind of sending us all these little signals. He would say, here's a movie, watch this movie and think about me. And every movie he'd give us, the main character committed suicide. And so one day we were watching a movie, can't remember the name of it now, but in the movie, the main character killed himself. And I turned to my husband, I said, wait a minute, this is the 5th movie that he has asked us to watch. Watch this and think about me. And the main character kills himself. I said, I think Jeff is planning a suicide. And just as my husband was saying, oh, he wouldn't do that, he has a little girl, I looked up and I saw Jeff. I said, he's right there. It's too late. And we just said, well, my husband said, well, I'll talk to someone on Monday, to see if he needs help or something. Well, it turned out that he had died. He overdosed and he died. And it was after he died, we learned that he had a daughter whose name was Faith. And she had found him dead and had to call for help. She was 5 years old. And because he was gone, she had to go move in with her heroin-addicted mother. So the whole message made sense. You have less than 5 years, Faith will find you and she will be hurt. And then I went, oh, wow. The whole message came back to me and I'm like, now it makes sense. Now that we can't do anything about it. Let's see.
Doesn't it seem like a cruel trick of fate or whatever way that we connect with higher order beings if we're given such things, but not in a way that we can use them and not in a way that we can actually save lives with the information, not in an uncontested way that we can actually put it to work for the light.
Yeah, it does seem cruel. I wrestled with it for a long time, and
because you're stuck with this paranormal information you didn't really want. You don't probably really want to know who's going to die or what's going to, the ill fate that's going to befall somebody sitting across from you. But if you do know it, you'd like for at least for it to be able to make a difference. And maybe it did.
I wrestled with that a lot. And I sometimes I said to them, if you're going to give me this information, at least tell me something that I can use. And no answer. So one year, I guess it was probably 5 years after Jeff died, I decided that I was probably crazy. And so I went to my invisible friends and gave them the ultimatum. I said, you either leave me alone permanently or I want you to give me 3 indisputable signs this year that seeing into the future is real.
Now, how old are you when you give them this ultimatum?
Probably about 35.
Okay.
And so what a year. That was my New Year's resolution. You guys either shape up or ship out. So that year, I think it was in May of that year, I had met a new friend and I was over to her house trying to help her with her computer. She was an older lady that was, doing things the hard way with her computer. And as I was at her house, I smelled smoke. And I had this sense of knowing that there was an answering machine in the basement that was going to short out and cause a fire. I started looking around the house and I saw her fire. I saw her house as if the fire had already happened. So I'm like, okay, I did ask for this. So I asked her, do you have a basement? Oh, yes, I have a basement. You can't go down there. It's a mess. But this woman was a hoarder. There was just garbage piled everywhere. And I saw a big hole in the roof. A hole big enough to drop a car through. You could see daylight through it. And, her cat brushed up against me and I sensed that the cat would die. And so I started asking her all these questions about her house. And then she finally said, would you like a tour of my house? I thought, oh, yeah, sure, here. So she shows me around, and every room I walked into, I would see the room as if it was already burned. And then there was one room, she said, oh, there's this one special bedroom in the back. I have all my parents' antiques and stuff back there. And I had a sense of knowing that room would be left alone. So then, I said, I had this feeling that she had a friend in Illinois. And the house would burn while she was in Illinois. And I said, do you have a friend in Illinois? And she said, yeah, I've been thinking about visiting him. And I went, okay. Eventually, I was trying to figure this out. I left. Well, it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, she left to go visit her friend in Illinois. The answering machine in the basement shorted out and caused the fire. Her cat died, and the whole house ended up burned exactly the way I saw it. And I went, okay, that's one.
So when you had the initial feeling, did you feel it was the answering machine, or you just felt the threat is in the basement somewhere, somehow?
I felt an answering machine, and I saw like a flash of an image of an answering machine with an electrical cord that was frayed.
Did you mention this to her?
I did, but she said she couldn't get to the answering machine because it was behind a mountain of... Someone else told me that there was not just a mountain of junk in the basement. There was rotted fruit and stuff in there.
Oh.
And it was moldy, and when people went to help her clean out the basement after the fire, they had to keep going outside to vomit before they could come back in and then finish. It was bad. So there was burned, rotten, moldy fruit. But I saw that fire before it happened, and that kind of bothered me because I wanted to be able to stop the fire. Let's see, later that year, my husband and we had a problem with our car where I can't remember if it was the window that was stuck. There was something on the car that was stuck, and we took it someplace to have it fixed. And then as he got back in the car, I said, it seems crazy that we're spending $200 to get this car fixed when we're only going to have it for another 6 weeks. And he said, what? And I went, I don't know. What did I just say? Why did I say that? I don't know. And I just feel like there's going to be an accident. There's going to be a car accident. And so then 6 weeks later, he was out driving the car, taking kids to school, and some guy whose brakes went out, he ended up stopping the other guy's car for him, not intending to, but it totaled our car because the car was 14 years old. And said that was it. And when he called me to tell me about the accident, he called me and he said, well, it happened. That's all he said. I'm like, great. Okay, now the car's gone. But, nobody got hurt. That's the important part. And the guy who hit him didn't have insurance. And fortunately, it all worked out eventually, but didn't go too well for the guy who caused the accident. So I'm like, okay, that's 2. So then about a month after that, my kids were in Catholic school. I was at school talking to a husband and wife who had twins in my son's kindergarten class. And that little light orb comes on, it leaves. And I went, oh, great, here we go again. So I end up looking at this woman and saying, do you ever burn candles in your basement? And she said, yes, sometimes. And I said, be careful about that. And I just said, I'm not going to say anything else. So she and her husband walk away singing the Twilight Zone theme song, making fun of me. And 2 weeks later, she was burning some candles in her basement. And guess what happened? House fire. Everybody got out safely. See, I tried to deliver that one. Everybody got out safely. And she came back to me about a month later, just really freaked out. How did you know? How did you know? I know I did that myself, but it wasn't you. How did you know? I'm like, I don't know. I just see things. So I'm like, all right, those are my 3 signs. I guess that's all I'm going to get. You guys will give you this message. No, you can't do anything about it. So, there were many times when I saw someone's unexpected death several months or even several years before it happened. The message has always come to me in kind of a riddle, so I never have enough information to actually do anything about it, just enough to recognize it when it happens. No.
Okay. So when it comes to death, you're just seeing the specifics of death, somebody's death, or just the fact
It's usually a riddle. Like one time I was at church and I saw a man that I'd never met before, and this was the crowd after church. And I heard a voice say, this man who appeared to be in his early 40s had less than a year to live. And I said, what would he die of? I mean, I could pick a woman out of the crowd and know that it was his wife. His children were, talking to other kids. And I said, they seem like a nice family. What's going on? And the voice that I heard said, well, he will die of a very short illness. I said, an illness? You mean an accident? No, an illness. Okay, that's all I got. Well, about 9 months later, he died suddenly, choking on his food. That's a 5-minute illness.
Wow.
So there was nothing that could have been done about that. And if I had told his wife, she would have laughed at me. And then later, I felt like she would have laughed at me just like the people did with the house that burned. And then what would it have done? I mean, she just would have felt guilty about it. I mean, it would have made her experience even worse. There's no way.
She might have changed her cooking in some way as to avoid it.
They were eating pizza.
Oh, well.
But, and I didn't even know this family's name until after the guy died. And then I saw his picture and I went, yeah, that's them. That's the people. But, I get just enough information to recognize it when it happens, not enough information to actually do anything about it.
Now, does this ever happen with regard to national events or larger picture events like 911, anything like that?
It did happen with 911. The day before, the September 10th, 2001, I heard a voice that said, today is the last day. And I said, the last day of what? And the voice said, the last day of what you think of as normal. And I said, okay, whatever.
Well, that was certainly true. Yeah.
That was certainly true looking back on it, but, I couldn't have done anything about it. Another interesting thing that happened. One day, it was August 2015. I was just kind of walking around in my own backyard, and I looked up and saw Wayne Dyer, the author. Earlier that year, I had just read his last book. It was called I Can See Clearly Now. And there were parts of that book that bothered me. I did not like the way he treated his wife. And I thought, how can this guy who's such a spiritual guru treat his wife the way he writes about in his book? So I saw his spirit come to me and he said, I believe you have some questions for me. And I said, yes, I do. So I asked him about his wife. How could you treat her that way? And he said, well, maybe I'll do better next time. Yeah, you're right. I was wrong about that. Maybe I'll do better next time. And then he left. So then I went in the house and I thought, Wayne Dyer isn't dead. Well, maybe he just died. I get on the news, nothing. I went, well, I'm sure I imagined that whole thing. Well, 2 days later, it was all over the news that Wayne Dyer had died. And I went, oh, that was real. So it was a few years after that when I ran into a spiritualist church because my invisible friends kept nudging me to go there. And I finally walked in and I said, look, I'm just here to shut you guys up. I'm not getting all involved. But long story short, I walked into the spiritualist church and very soon became their webmaster. And now I'm the treasurer and I've learned mediumship and I've learned some healing. And now this is making more sense than it made before. I can't do mediumship the way the church wants me to do it, but I kind of have my own way of doing it and it works for me. And so I feel like I'm learning a little bit more each day. I still do wish I could reach into next week and get the lottery numbers, but it just doesn't work that way.
Or if you could just dematerialize yourself, get into the vault of a particular large and larcenous bank larceny grande or whatever, and then grab whatever's loot is there, dematerialize yourself and the loot and appear outside without having triggered any alarms. That'd be a pretty slick trick like you've done before,
I'd rather win the lottery, but that's hard to do when I don't play it. But back to this extra dimensional creatures and the whole thing at the Air Force Base. I want to mention last October, Georg, you and Brian discovered that some of the turmoil in my life has come from malevolent alien life forms and some dark energies that have been attached to me for years. And I feel like at that trip at the Air Force Base when I was abducted, that I had things installed in me. You and Brian have found reptoid occupation, nanotechnology that was installed in me a long time ago, and this nanotechnology was designed to bring really nasty people into my life. And I would only have relationships with narcissists. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, every job I've ever had, my boss has been terrible. And it just seems like the more I try to disconnect from people who are that way, the more I run into them. There was intergenerational programming, and I think you could probably comment on that better than I can. But after removing all that stuff, I have to say, I feel like I have a new body.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it was like, it just looked like a bunch of wires that were in the soul body, that just extraneous matter that didn't belong there. When we as shamans look at the body, we see more than just the physical form. We see, or we hope to see, or we can shift our focus at will to see the various subtle bodies behind the physical body. And in that one, there were a lot of extraneous matter that shouldn't have been there.
Well, that's what I was saying. As they were removing it, I could feel like little wires being pulled out of me.
Yeah.
It was uncomfortable, but I thought, all right, at least
the invisible friends or invisible fiends or whatever they were, I think they should at least have to name themselves, like Curly, Moe, and what were the other stooges? Let's see.
Larry,
Curly, Moe, and I can't remember the other one. Yeah.
Well, one time I did, one of them came to talk to me, and I don't know whether they were good guys or bad guys, and I insisted on giving this being a name, and it said, I don't have a name, I don't need a name, I'm just here to help you. And I insisted on naming it Stacy, and he said, I'm not Stacy, and he just left.
So they can be a little quarrelsome and opinionated, huh?
They can, but I really felt like that one in particular was there to help me. But sometimes they come to help, sometimes they're not so helpful, and it's hard to tell if that's why. Although with the Hornet things, I know they were not there to help. Some of them, it's pretty obvious.
Well, I think what you point out is something that a lot of spiritually gifted people run into, which is it's very difficult to know how to direct and grow and nurture your gift in a positive manner. But at least you're trying to do it through your church. You have a good mediumship class to help people learn to do that, learn to have, I guess, positive interactions with those who have gone beyond and learn something from it. Hopefully help those who are on the other side. And in fact, you're involved in a form of healing work where you help those who are on the other side quite often too, aren't you?
Yes, and some people come to me for healing, and it turns out that the challenge is coming from a deceased relative who had some kind of unresolved trauma. So we speak to the deceased relative and find the source. It might be, well, they were abused as children. So we heal the abuse and help them to see how their lives could be turned around. And then the person who's still living on this side of the veil, it starts feeling better because they don't have that. I guess there's kind of a memory that's carried through the energy somehow.
Well, yes, there's a term for that. There's a term for that. It's called kinsvilja. That is that which is carried through from your kinfolk and their experiences over lifetimes.
Yeah, and I've noticed that it's interesting how some people walk around with this struggle and they don't know where it's coming from, and sometimes they'll go back to a great grandparent and we heal that grandparent, and then all of a sudden their problems go away. It's like, oh, I no longer have this urge to, or whether it's claustrophobia or an urge to drink or something like that, because you resolve the original problem from.
Now, how do you go about resolving it? Let's say that I had a great grandfather who was a raging alcoholic. How would you fix him?
Well, I have a process I go through, and the process is just there to pretty much get me out of my head. So I just kind of open up to what is. And so I'll feel into it and go, oh, there's a great grandfather here. And then I can feel his personality as if he's sitting in front of me. And I can sense that there's a struggle. So I ask him about the struggle. And, I have like a chart and some affirmations I go through. And then like spirit will point me to the right affirmation. And then I'll read it and go, well, does this make any sense? And usually the person says, oh, yeah, here's this little story. Okay, so we install the affirmation for the person who, may have been gone for 75 years. And then they have a chance. I mean, it's not that they have to heal. Some people don't want to heal, but then the deceased person can choose to heal of that. And then that healing kind of trickles down through the generations to everyone who's living. I guess one example is there was a major conflict in my family back in 1950. It involved my great-grandfather when he died. His children were arguing over their inheritance, which wasn't really all that much, but they were arguing. And then there was a big split in the family where his children and his grandchildren were never allowed to speak to each other anymore. And so during this healing process, we went back to heal my great-grandfather, and the healing trickled down. And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from a second cousin that I didn't know existed. And we talked on the phone for a couple of hours. She calls me just apologizing for her whole family's, because it was her side of the family that kind of caused the trouble. And I said, this happened before you and I were born, and this doesn't have to be our problem. And I said, let's just consider our family to be reunited. Let's consider it healed, and we move on. Turns out she lives just maybe 20 minutes from me. And we talked a couple of times, but I felt like she needed to hear that it was over. It was,
well,
and I'm not sure how she got my phone number, but she called me. So, and I thought it was really neat.
That's a really nice story.
Exactly.
Well, thank you.
It was just over one day. Well,
thank you for sharing all of that and sharing with our audience your experiences. So here we're wrapping up the 26th episode and our third interview with Jayne about her life experiences. What would you like to explore next time?
Oh, I don't know. Can't begin to imagine.
All right. Well, I assume you will be doing another episode on what you've learned along the way and recovering your health and all that, or did you want to just get into all the allopathic folly that you've experienced over the years?
Oh, yeah, we could do that. There could be a whole episode about the medical community and the problems with that.
And then we could look at alternatives.
Yep, and the alternatives that actually work.
All right, that sounds like an episode in the making. Well, this has been Georg Breckman interviewing Jayne, and we much appreciate you opening your life to our audience for them to learn from and learn about the fascinating experiences that you've had. And we look forward to you joining us next time on Shamanic Voices. We're trying to be out there about every other week with a new episode. And you can find us on Audible and Apple Podcast, Spotify, basically just most places that you would find an audio version. This is going to be purely audio. Most of ours will be audio and visual, but the Jayne series will be strictly audio at her request. And we thank you for joining us here. And Jayne, thank you for being here today, and go with the gods.
Go with the gods.
Thank you for joining us on Shamanic Voices. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, share, follow us on social media, tell your friends. Every click, every share helps us with this project as we try to share with the world the customs passed down in the ancient Scandinavian tradition for over 8,000 years. We hope you enjoyed our show. Please join us next time at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every other Wednesday. You can also check out our website, teutonichealing.com. Check the description for a link. where you can explore more about what it is that we do, contact us for a session, or send us your questions to have answered. We look forward to sharing the space with you soon. See you next time on Shamanic Voices. Go with the gods.